Mr. Pradeep Surekha, past President ICC, Ms. Smita Bajoria, founder EduNet Foundation, Director of SK Bajoria Group, Dr. Rajiv Singh, DG ICC. Dear friends, always a pleasure to be back here and very good to see all of you. And I'm really very pleased today to have the opportunity of sharing my thoughts about Viksit Bharat 2047. Now, it's a particularly appropriate time to do so because I think we are all in the midst of or poised to make choices which I believe would accelerate our journey towards Viksit Bharat. Therefore, I think it's a very opportune time really to discuss exactly what we mean by Viksit Bharat, what is the pathway, what could be the obstacles, and really what are our realistic expectations of traversing that journey. Now, as I said, we are today really in the midst of a very important moment of choice. But we've also actually completed 10 years of very solid performance. And that foundation of 10 years and all the transformations that have taken place actually enables the country today to move up to a higher gear on that journey towards Viksit Bharat. Now, what does Viksit Bharat, what does that journey really require us? I think first of all, it requires a vision for the nation. It requires an understanding of the world because in this day and age, we live in an environment, we have a lot that we seek from the world in turn, as we get bigger, has an increasing interest in our performance and in our thinking in many ways. And we need really strong leadership. We need the pathway to Viksit Bharat is actually very much a journey of reformization, but a journey where we actually, to quote Prime Minister, a vision, understanding and leadership. I think this is really in many ways the choice that we have to make, and clearly that choice cannot be made by looking towards a duty roster of multiple people who will come and go as they like in terms of the potential and future of this nation. So it's very, very important today that we are clear, we are decisive, and we are very supportive about the direction in which the nation is going, that we are very conscious of what we have achieved for the last 10 years, and we are very conscientious about what we want to do for the next 25. Now, different people have described this journey towards Viksit Bharat in different ways. One way, a very easy way, is actually to put some numbers on it. And the obvious number is a GDP number. We are today $3.8 trillion economy. I think the first immediate step, which we hope to achieve in the next few years itself, is to become a $5 trillion economy. That was a goal we had spelled out some years ago. And then really between the 5 trillion, I think the target is not actually whether, but when in that Viksit Bharat journey we actually reach a $30 trillion economy. A lot of studies actually are very confident we will do it certainly by 2047 or even earlier. And then I draw your attention to the fact that Goldman Sachs some months ago came up with a report which again equally confidently predicts that by 2070s we will actually be an economy which is $52.5 trillion, which at that point of time, according to Goldman Sachs, would put us second. But I'm very sure that we are not a nation who will be content to stay second. So that's a kind of a numerical description of what this journey would involve. But if one looks at it, what it actually takes is how do we address the challenges which we have inherited? How do we actually focus on what is much more contemporary? And actually, how do we prepare ourselves for the emerging era? Because if one looks today at the pace of change, the new domains that have come up, the new businesses that have come up, the new professions that have come up, how do we strengthen ourselves at home? How do we improve our ability to compete abroad? Because there's a correlation here. The stronger we are at home, the more effective we are abroad. But the more effective we are abroad, there's more that we can leverage in terms of resources, capital, technology, best practices that we can bring home to actually accelerate that journey towards Viksit Bharat. So this, in a sense, is the definition of the task before us. Now, before I come to what our thinking is on how to proceed, I want to give all of us a reality check, which is that in many ways, we still, even after 10 years of very solid foundation, we still actually have a few handicaps with which we embark on this journey. One of them, of course, is multiple decades of what you can call socialist ideas about the economy. And then when these ideas failed to deliver, created a crisis in the early 90s, reforms. But the reforms were really delayed. I mean, if one looks at some other countries who we could think of in a way as a peer group, if one looks, for example, at the reforms which China embarked on those reforms about 15 years before we did. Now, even when we embarked on those reforms, we still didn't pursue it as single-mindedly and with the kind of focus that we should have, particularly in the areas of manufacturing and of infrastructure. So, today, 3 decades after our era of reform started, we are actually doing what we should have probably done in those 3 decades, which is really create a modern, efficient infrastructure, create a manufacturing which needs that infrastructure to be competitive, create technologies which need manufacturing as a base for that technology to actually emerge. So these are really some of the realities we need to remind ourselves, because we need to address these even as we go forward. The second is actually also a mindset problem, but of a different kind, which is that socialist era, that kind of permit Raj, license Raj era. It actually also created a culture of hostility to growth. That the job creators were not given the respect, I would say the latitude, the kind of support that any economy at this stage of our growth should actually do. And it was strengthened by this hostility towards growth. Strengthened actually by a culture of leakages, that we had a socio-economic distribution system which was initially designed to be inefficient. It was actually designed to leak, and it was that leak which was the basis of politics in many states. So we have today tried to overcome it. I will talk about that. But in many states, including, let me be honest, this one, that culture of hostility to growth, that aversion to respecting job creators, that I would say almost discouragement towards talent and skill expressing itself, I think that is still very much a burden that we carry. The third handicap we have is actually the shortcomings of governance. That in many ways, we have equated poor governance with freedom. That when actually attempts have been made to improve the quality of governance, this is actually often opposed, saying that, somewhere it is a detraction from our democracy. Now we need to be very clear. Democracy cannot be built on poor governance. The two are not at all compatible. If anything, they are antithetical. So we have various versions of it. But if you look, what is common to all these versions is actually a kind of a vote bank principle. That to appease a vote bank, we are actually willing to not only tolerate but sometimes actually practice and encourage poor governance, because that is really what allows that vote bank politics to flourish. Now that could be in terms of the security of our borders. It could be in terms of allowing something like Article 370 to play out as long as it did, even though the Constitution explicitly recognized it as a temporary provision. It could be about that indifference to the fact that many areas of this country were actually ungoverned in the name of, these were left-wing extremist areas. And actually the writ of the state till recently did not run in many of these areas. So this too was a handicap to our growth. And finally, of course, when you have all of this, the reality was that till a decade ago, very honestly, our own ambitions were very low. Today, we are defining the goal of Viksit Bharat. That itself is a big change, because in the past, we didn't do so. Our sights were much lower, our aspirations were much more modest. I think in many ways, we were almost fatalistically inclined to accept that there were limits to what we could do. That is what has changed. And it is that change, recognition of that change and the new hope that this has produced, that is really what will drive our journey towards Viksit Bharat. Now, how do we build Viksit Bharat? I think the first dimension is the very obvious dimension, which is the economic one. And again, as a shorthand, one looks at growth rate, because the growth rate really captures so many aspects of development, not all of it. And I would say today it's should be a source of great hope to all of us, that despite the COVID era, when much of the world has not recovered from it, much of the international economy is still struggling with the aftermath of the COVID, we have actually returned to a 7% growth rate, with the expectation actually that we will go much higher this year. Not just return to a high growth rate, but also many of the decisions we took during COVID were actually far-seeing, they were disciplined, they understood the importance of dealing with a crisis of that magnitude, but not in a way in which it would hobble us as we were on the recovery path. So one of the very important differences in the manner in which we dealt with the COVID and other countries dealt with the COVID was actually we still maintained our fiscal deficit discipline. So today when we say that inflation is under control, that growth is very robust, that we see investment confidence come back, I think a lot of it is the fact that we actually took a very, I would say, smart, deliberative approach to finding solutions during the COVID time. Now, while we speak of 7% or higher growth rate, it's a combination of many factors which is really today driving reform. I mean, one of it is easier to do business. One of it is the ease of living. How do you bureaucratize a society? How do you lift the burden of bureaucracy, which in many ways is such a dampener on growth and creativity in this country? Then again, as I said, we have this deficit of infrastructure to make up. What Gati Shakti has done by coordinating different aspects today of our infrastructure development and by using technology to actually realize the efficiencies within, We have actually transformed today the manner in which the infrastructure is being built in this country. For a nation which had a reputation of being a laggard, if not worse, in this respect, I think it is worth thinking about today that we are building 28 kilometers of highway every day, or that we are laying 14 kilometers of railway track every day, or that if one looks at the last 10 years, in the last 10 years we have built 75 airports, which is almost 7.5 airports a year. Or if one looks at the number of metros, every 2 years we actually build 3 metros. So I give you those really as indications or indices. And I do that in a city which is actually seeing the benefits today of a metro expansion, which is looking really at what the possibility of road building and infrastructure development can do. Now, while this in many ways is the hard infrastructure, I think we also have to ensure, and this is where the world outside has a very important bearing, that we give the requisite support to our businesses, to our labor, to our employment, so that they actually are protected or they have a level playing field in respect of unfair competition. Because that is also a real challenge to the growth of business in this country. The idea that other businesses from other countries which enjoy subsidies, which enjoy all sorts of production factor advantages, they come in with impunity into our economy without any reciprocal access, and they have a free run of our economy. I think today clarity in that respect and policy is designed to obviate the consequences of this kind of unfair access with unfair advantages. I think that too is part of the economic outlook which is required to build a Viksit Bharat. Now, when we speak about economic outlook, I would particularly stress the revival of manufacturing, because at the end of the day, there is a debate today, a very active debate. I think many of you would be aware. There is a school of thought that we are actually not capable of manufacturing, that we have missed the bus forever. The government doesn't agree. The government believes that previous governments may have missed the bus, but we have boarded that bus. We have every intention of driving that bus. That today, with a range of supportive policies, including the production-linked incentives, we are very convinced today, and that if our infrastructure is modern and competitive, if there are friendly business policies, if environmental clearances are not used to block business as it used to be done in the past, we are very convinced today that actually manufacturing can grow in this country. And we need that because a lot of countries, especially in the aftermath of COVID, see short supply chains actually as essential to national security. During COVID, not just us, the entire world woke up to the fact that supply chains eventually led to one very over-concentrated geography in the world. And if something happened to that geography, which it did during COVID, actually the entire global economy was at risk. So when we today talk about manufacturing, when we talk about supply chains, we are not talking economics anymore. We are actually talking national security. So how do we revive manufacturing? And that is why this constant emphasis that we are putting on Make in India. Not just Make in India. I think it's important in this forum that I also urge business that you procure from India, because I do understand that often people look with a very strong focus on relative competition. But I can tell you that if we are really to build this economy, it's important that businesses themselves take the lead of fostering a supply chain which is much more domestic. That businesses need to take Make in India as seriously as today government is taking it. So this can only happen, the revival of manufacturing can only happen if government and business actually come together as a partnership. Now, the moment they do that, you can actually see, things start to change. For decades, we were an importer of defense equipment. In the last 5 years, actually last 10 years, the moment we start pushing defense, make in India, that same country, the same economy, the same businesses which earlier felt that they couldn't compete with the world have suddenly begun to do so. That we are seeing today, make in India is actually producing defense exports. We are looking actually at our overall exports today. At $770 billion, they are actually at a record level. So there are countries struggling to go back to the pre-COVID levels of exports. We are one of the few who have actually forged ahead. Now there's a very good reason for it, and the good reason frankly is a very good government. So I urge you to reflect on that, because Viksit Bharat is not just the responsibility of the government. It's for the government to lay out the vision, as I said, to provide the leadership, to undertake the necessary reforms, but the stakeholders have to travel down that path, and that stakeholders is very much actually includes, as I said, the job creators, the wealth creators, the employers of this country. Now, when I speak about rising to the challenge, I can actually give you multiple examples where, if you reflect on it, we have surprised ourselves. When the COVID came, quite apart from the fact that we, at that point of time, even on something as basic as masks, we were importing it. Can you imagine that a country of this size, a $4 trillion economy, was not even making its own masks? But from masks and PPEs and ventilators, all that we did, the real takeaway from COVID was actually the fact that we, one, ended up demonstrating that we were one of the most efficient vaccine producers in the world. And two, that we actually had an invent in India vaccine as well. Now, we began the COVID as a country of concern. The rest of the world worried, how is India going to be, going to handle COVID? We ended the COVID actually as a country which gave 100 countries vaccines and 150 countries medicines of various kinds. So look at, what we actually are capable of. I'll give you a very different example. Look at telecom, and don't look at telecom purely as a service which all of us do. Look at telecom also with the national security aspect of it, the fact that all of us, as we say, we sometimes tell our phones what we don't even tell our own spouses. So our phones know so much about us. And yet, what were we doing? We were importing 4G from China. We were importing 2G, 3G from China and Europe. When we decided to put our minds to 5G, lo and behold, actually, this India is completely capable of producing its own 5G stack. So the 5G today that you have on your phones, for the first time, actually is an India stack. And you have to ask yourself, if you could do 5G, why couldn't you have done it earlier? Now, I can go on and on. It could be, I gave you the example of defense. I gave you the example, look at space. Look at, a domain like drones, that are something on which we were relatively a late starter. But today, across the country, if you actually look at the proliferation of, our designing and production of drones of various kinds for various objectives, it's actually very, very impressive. Even something as interesting, something as basic as fertilizer. We were We, of course, import a lot of fertilizer. We produce a lot of fertilizer. We continue to use fertilizer year after year with very little thought, both about the injury it causes to the soil and actually the cost that it has for the national economy. Now, that same country which is doing this for decades is suddenly discovering the virtues of nano fertilizer. So I'm giving you these as examples that when we actually put our minds to it, we are perfectly capable of coming up with different solutions, with great achievements, doing things which compare with what is happening in the rest of the world and which sometimes can be even faster. You know, a model case is actually UPI. I mean, if you look at the manner in which we have embraced today cashless payments, our embrace is far, far more than any other country in the world. I mean, our monthly number of transactions, monthly, is about 2.5 times that of the United States in a year. I mean, that is the kind of difference when it comes to embrace of digital technology actually in our personal lives. So think about the potential, think about actually even what we have achieved in the last 10 years. And I think that should be very much a motivator of what we can go do in the years ahead. Now, of course, when we talk about economy, we talk about all these policies, finally it does come down to good governance. And good governance has a number of definitions. It's a world into itself. But I think if there's a common thread today in everything that we are doing, it is actually the use of digital tools today to improve governance. That if one looks at the scale of what we are doing and the transparency of what we are doing and the efficiency of what we are doing, actually again, it's a remarkable transition in the last 10 years. That we today, without leakage, have the ability to to give rations every month to 81 crore people. It's a staggering feat. If one looks, if one looks at pretty much any social scheme today of the government, and I know some schemes like Ayushman Bharat haven't come to this state for reasons which the state knows best, but those which have come, I mean, as I said, the scale of it, because the targeting of it has become so efficient. Something as complicated as giving houses. Giving houses has a history in this country which goes back to before I joined the government, which is a long time ago. We used to do it in a village, 10 houses somebody once told me actually it was a problem in the old days, because if you are in the political world, they give you a limited number of houses and said, please give these decide where these houses are to go. But the numbers were so small that the people who didn't get the houses far outnumbered those who did. So you got no gratitude for the action at the end of the day. Today, actually, we have, in the last 10 years under Awas Yojana, we have done 40 million houses, 4 crore houses. Now 4 crore houses with an average family size in India of 4.8 means about 190 million people have got houses which they did not have before Narendra Modi became Prime Minister. 190 million people is like actually housing. 190 million people is like housing all of Germany and Japan at the same time. Even something which all of you hear every day, Ujjwala. I mean, many of us gave up our gas cylinders in response to the appeal. Today, Ujjwala, the beneficiaries of Ujjwala are 110 million people. And remember, there are 110 million kitchens out there. So again, do the multiplication and see the impact that this has. Now, why are we able to do it? We are able to do it today because we are applying efficient instruments. Those instruments existed. There was no commitment to apply it. In many cases, there were vested interests, which there still are in many states, which block the efficient application of good governance tools. So I mentioned that to you because if one takes the total impact today of better governance, in the last 10 years, 250 million people have come out of poverty, which in our history is the largest which has happened in any decade. So this is the journey that we need to continue because it's the expanded middle class. It's people coming out of poverty, pushing up, who in turn will push the next segment higher. This is really what Viksit Bharat is about. But all these are the problems that we inherited or which is around us today in the contemporary world. I think if you are planning for 2047, it is also important that we plan for the sunrise industries, for the technologies of tomorrow, for what could be the other revolutions. If we have ridden the digital revolution so successfully, and if it has helped us to address so many problems, there are many other possibilities out there. And it is important we are aware of it, we prepare for it. And preparation sometimes can have very multiple facets. And I think if one looks at it, clearly we are heading for a world of AI and semiconductors, of electric vehicles and battery storage, of green and clean technologies, of drones and space, of possible seabed resource extraction. So there are actually physically new domains out there which are going to impact our economy. There are going to be ways of doing business which will, if we marvel today at ChatGPT, I mean, this is a baby step compared to actually what awaits us. And that what awaits us is, we are not talking decades here. We are actually talking a few years. I mean, in this term, at the end of this term which will be coming, the world and the economy and the potential and prospects will be looking very, very different. So how do we actually prepare for that? And that is where, human resources, educational reforms, which is why something like the new national education policy is so important. Much more seamless infrastructure, because the efficiencies finally of the economy is still very much dependent on it. That we really have to look at radical improvements in rail, ports, air, roads. We have to look at new forms of employment itself. That, there are limits obviously to how much governments can employ. There could also obviously be time taken for non-governmental employment to expand. So how do we actually focus on self-employment? How do we support self-employment? It is not something which was done recently, not done till recently. That if one looks actually both conceptually and scale-wise at schemes like Mudra loans, that again, just think of in Calcutta alone, 25 lakh Mudra loans have been given out. So, nationally, we are actually probably talking close to about 500 million. So, if one looks today at Mudra, one looks at the Swanidhi for the informal sector, how do we actually find ways by which small business, personal, the informal sector, people who otherwise in the rigid orthodox structure would not even be eligible for any loans, how do we today provide them with the resources to carry on with the business, expand it, employ others? I think these today are some elements of how we need to think bigger if we are to think for tomorrow. So finally, let me come to my own immediate direct domain, which is foreign policy. And you would ask, so in all of this, what does foreign policy do? And as I said, foreign policy's first responsibility is actually to see how we can get the resources, the technologies, the best practices from the world. Because there are countries, if one looks at a Japan or a Korea or ASEAN countries, Many of them grew fast because their foreign policy single-mindedly went out there at the world and said, what is it we can bring back home? And what is it we can do actually to make our national economics much more efficient? The second is connectivity, because partly for the historically the colonial period, which broke our natural connectivity, it was aggravated by the partition, which created problems at both ends of India. So how do we today rebuild connectivity? Because there is interest in the world. Once you become the fifth largest economy, when people know you will be the third largest economy soon, the world also understands whether it's production here or consumption here, any which way, they want the partnership between different regions of the world and India to be much more effective than it is. And one big obstacle today is actually efficient logistics. So if you look today, I would really say connectivity initiatives have very, very high importance in our foreign policy. And it's no accident that in the middle of all the preoccupations in the G20, actually the leaders of India, Europe, Saudi Arabia, UAE, US took time out to agree on a connectivity initiative called IMEC. Now, I'm giving you that as one example. There are others. Yesterday, my colleague Sarbananda Sonowalji actually signed a long-term agreement in Chabahar port. That's another very important connectivity corridor, because the international north-south transport corridor can take us from Iran into Central Asia, separately Caucasus, Russia, and then into Europe. East of us, something should be of great interest to this city. If one looks at the India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway, and I accept right now the conditions in Myanmar are a challenge, but that highway actually has the ability to connect Calcutta to the Pacific coast of Vietnam. So if these projects actually are realized, do think of it, look at the map of the world and see where these connectivity passages lead. We will have connectivity to the east all the way to the Pacific. We will have connectivity to the west, IMEC, which actually takes you to the Atlantic. We will have connectivity through the international north-south transport corridor, which takes us to the Baltic and the North Sea. So the role that foreign policy can play today, because these are long-term enterprises, they are not going to happen in a year, sometimes not even in a decade. But in many cases, the work has begun. So how do we take this forward? I would say that's a very important contribution foreign policy can make. The third is really in the alignments and the comfort levels, because increasingly, in this data-centric world, business is no longer just business. Countries are very picky about where the data goes, who has access to it, who harnesses it, who deploys it. So there is now, in a way, a different set of filters which will increasingly come into business. So you will have concept today like trusted vendors, Already in telecom, it is something which people give a lot of importance to. In the semiconductor world today, if you look at the efforts today being made to diversify and increase the production of semiconductors, it is seen as very central to de-risking the global economy. Because if one looks today at the importance of chips, chips pretty much determine everything in a modern economy. So how do we today get into those value chains? How do we get into semiconductor production? Who are the partners? Who do we work with? Who will work with us? I think that too is something which foreign policy can help determine. Then if one aims still higher, and this is certainly there in the promise that the BJP has made to the country for our next term, we actually have set our sights on becoming a global hub for design, for innovation, for engineering. We will actively woo global companies, multinational companies to bring, because there is one great advantage we have not used it well in the past, which is our skills and our talent, our demographics. That again, some of you would have seen a news report 2 or 3 days ago that there are more Indian students in the last year in Germany than there are from China. This was not the case before. Now, why is this happening? No, I would hold that clapping, because it's a very double-edged statistic, because eventually those people should be here in India. They should be here in India if I actually am in a position to get that kind of global business to come to India. So today we are actually seeing in a digital data-centric world, a technology-driven world, the importance of talent and skill. There's a great deal of interest in mobility, that people want. Mobility is good, but mobility should not be one-sided. We also need to see mobility on the other side. Businesses coming into this country. We want eventually to work from India. We want to work for India, for the world, but we want to work from India. And work from India needs to be a parallel facet of Make in India. And finally, we have to accept that, this is a globalized world. There are already about 18, 19 million Indians, almost 2 crore Indians, who live, work and study abroad. This is a reality. It's good for us. It's good for us in a variety of ways. Now, this number is going to grow, partly because of the nature of the economy, partly because of the likely evolution of global demographics. So one very important responsibility of foreign policy is actually going to be how to secure Indians abroad. So what you referred to, Smitaji, saying, the operations we did in Ukraine, we cannot, and in fact, we are not taking these as one-off challenges. We need to have a system, because given the magnitude of our human resources spread across the world, we need to have a system which is prepared at short notice to take care of every Indian going out of our shores who may be in trouble of some kind. And that, I tell people, when we speak about Modi Ki Guarantee, that is actually Modi Ki Guarantee outside our borders. And it is a guarantee that we have actually already delivered. So, in this journey towards Viksit Bharat, we know where we want to go, we know how we want to go. We believe that we have the vision, the experience, the courage to reform, the ability to deliver it on the ground, a 10-year record. These kinds of journeys, they don't have a silver bullet. But the next best thing is actually pressing the right button on the right day. So please do that. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'd be very happy to respond to anything you may have to say.
Honorable Minister, thank you. I think it's always a pleasure to hear you. And listening to you, the final thought which I had was welcome to New India, which is confident, fearless, assertive, full of pride, and Atmanirbhar, but globally engaged. And you are a reflection of the aspirations of 140 crores Indians when we look at the world and how India engages with them. Thank you for your wonderful address. With your permission, we would like to take some questions. I think maybe the first one can be from the riots itself. Mrs. Bajoria can start. Yes, working.
Thank you for a very enlightening talk. It's very engaging. Okay. My question is that India is engaging its best practices for the neighborhood nations, Pakistan, China, and Burma and all. But however, there is a lot of hostility around. There is a China factor possibly that is playing out. How does India plan to deal with these hostilities all around us?
You know, you use the word hostility. I would very dispassionately use the word competitiveness. I think the world is competitive. Every country competes with other countries. Some countries compete more. Some countries compete a little more fairly. Some countries compete less fairly. These are the realities of life. Now we have to plan and we have to act keeping that in mind. So when it comes to our neighborhood, I would assume that in many ways we have a natural advantage, an advantage of geography, of culture in many respects, of logistics, of shorter distances, of proximity. But we also, because neighbors, you know, every country's neighbors also have problems among them. There will be that side of the ledger as well. And we have to learn how to, anticipate what could be competitive moves. We have to be very strategically aware of it. So if I were to give you an example, let us take something like Sri Lanka. When Sri Lanka went into the kind of deep crisis that it did a year and a half ago, to me it made eminent strategic sense that we actually responded very strongly at a time when the rest of the world was actually unclear about what they were willing to do. Now contrast this with how it was 15 years ago. 15 years ago actually things were happening in Sri Lanka. Hambantota port was decided in 2008. At that time the thinking in this country was that we should have no problem with it. So, if you don't have the understanding of the world, you don't have the awareness, or if there is some kind of ideology blinkers that you have, or some vested interest at play, then your calculations are going to go wrong. So I think it's very important to have that grounded sense, to be guided by national interest, to in ourselves build up that spirit of competitiveness. And if we do that, I'm very confident that in our neighborhood, because I look at another neighbor very close by here, Bangladesh. When I contrast what the relationship in Bangladesh was before 10 years, and I look at it now, the kind of people who used to operate from there, who actually directly impacted the security of our northeast, there's a sea change today. Today, our goods are going from our country to Chattogram and Mongla ports. If you look at the pre-65 links, which were all cut off, the rail links, the road links, they've all been built today. Today, our trains are going, our trucks are going, the waterways are operating. There is power connection, there's a fuel pipeline. Now that's really what good neighborliness is about.
How do you see Russia emerging in the next decade due to the sanctions and the ongoing war? What sort of an impact will that have on India and the rest of the world?
There are three aspects of Russia that we need to consider. One, from an Indian point of view, we have always had a positive relationship with Russia. And at the end of the day, if I were to evaluate any country, I should have the confidence to do it out of my own experience, rather than to listen to somebody else's experience and somebody else's agenda. So my historical experience with Russia has been positive, number one. Number two, if one looks at, my business, geopolitics in a way, I mean, look at the map of the world. You see this big Eurasian landmass. Okay. There are three big countries out there, us, China, Russia. It makes sense that, here in this, this is like a geopolitics 101, that your neighbor's neighbor is your friend. So there's a very strong strategic convergence out there, which, whose logic is undeniable. And the third is actually an economic factor, which is, I know there were certain trigger factors for this particular trend. But the fact is, Russia is one of the biggest natural resources producers in the world. Given India's economic requirements, we are talking, you say Viksit Bharat. What does Viksit Bharat mean? Viksit Bharat means we are saying at least for 25 years, probably much longer. For 25 years, this country is going to grow at between 7, 8, 9%. Think of the resources that will be required to support this. Think of the relationships which will provide those resources. And I put it to you that in that, Russia comes very, very high. So if I were to make, I put that experience issue aside, forget that I am from the foreign policy world. If I were to make a purely economic or business decision, I'd say there's a very strong case to have that relationship with Russia, because it's not, people look at oil. Yes, oil is very important. It's not just oil, It's oil, it's coking coal, it's metals of various kinds, it's fertilizers. So there are a range of products, and the more complex our economy becomes, I think in many ways, many of those resources out of Russia will become very important.
Mics. Pritish.
Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for this opportunity to interact with you. My name is Pritish Chaudhary and I represent Titagarh Rail Systems Limited. So you'll be happy to know that enabled by the Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat policies, we are the only Indian private sector entity, sir, that has the ability to design and manufacture metro coaches and passenger trains such as Vande Bharat, sir. So please let me convey my admiration to you and the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji for the great work that you've done in re-establishing and repositioning India in the global order, sir. And not just that, but igniting a strong sense of pride, of responsibility, and as you said, ambition in the youth of India, such as myself. So you spoke a lot about creating jobs through manufacturing and through the engineering sector, and my question pertains to that. So today we see a lot of MNCs come into India and create large design setups and engineering setups, employing 7, 8, 10,000 people. But the manufacturing jobs that come with those, which are actually much more manpower intensive, are kept abroad. So could you share some of your views on how there exists a potential to create almost 7 to 10 jobs, low skill but manpower intensive jobs with every engineering job that is created, sir? Could you share some of your views, please, on how we can bring and keep some of these manpower intensive jobs within the country?
Sure.
Thank you.
There's no sweeping cross-domain, cross-business solution. Come, please. Here's the problem in a way. The fact that MNCs are bringing design centers, research centers, etc. Would you rather have them or not have them? Because if you say it is conditional on many other things, you may not have them. Okay. Perhaps part of the answer is with us, that if our business culture builds up, if our economic energies are stronger, then a particular line of business, let us say your line of business, if your global competitors today are designing many things, if your line of business is very strong, the ability for them to migrate internally is that much stronger. Because we have seen what happens, when you cut yourself off. After all, when I began by saying we had a handicap, what in a way was the error? The error, number one, was to, become non-competitive by actually snapping those links and becoming very autarchical. And number two, by putting total focus on distribution with no attention to production. And that distributional politics, as I said, it was actually consciously a politics of poverty. That, it was designed to keep us backward so that the politics of the day would flourish. But that's a different matter. So I think it's very important today that we remain connected with the world. That, after all, we have seen the benefits of that. That I can see a time when, your coaches, if they are not already doing so, actually go out. So, I went to Mozambique last, maybe 2 years ago. And Mozambique, Maputo city, actually has a suburban system, which is a small version of, let us say, what there is in Mumbai or Chennai or what. Now, they were very keen because they had looked at what was happening in our country. The president of Mozambique happened to have studied in India. And we ended up actually with a contract for that. So I ended up having a ride on Indian rolling stock in Maputo. Now, to me, look, the idea that our carriages go out. We are constructing a metro today in this country. Anybody who goes to Mauritius should take pride in the metro that we have built there. So I do believe, just look at the length of the metro that we have done today. And I remember when the first metro project was being debated. This was during Atalji's government, NDA 1. I was in Japan at that time. It was done with a Japanese yen loan. There were people who said, why do we need this metro? We have lived fine without it. At that time, the only metro was that limited section that you had in this city. Now, when one looked at that, and if people were satisfied with that, and now you look at the reality of actually what is happening. And there's a world of a difference out there. So, I would say the answer, of course, see, look, we are going to press global business. If you want access to the Indian market, you want to be competitive, you want to be eligible, we will push for Make in India. That is a very fundamental commitment of the Modi government. And in different sectors, we are going to, really make that in many ways a kind of a critical principle. But as I said, part of the answer is also grow your business and attract those guys to come to you.
Sure. Thank you. Mr. Sharma?
Sir, namaskar. My name is Prashant. I run healthcare sector. We have hospitals here. So my question is pertaining to the dollar. We have seen it going from 8 rupees to above 80 rupees. And what is your take on it? How do you see it going in the next few years?
I thought only I remember that 8 rupee era. Look, it's actually a very interesting, there's a lot of interesting things happening in the currency world. You brought up the dollar. Actually, the most interesting currency right now is the yen. And don't take it otherwise, it's nothing to do with my Japan connections. If you look at the fluctuation in the yen, it's been very, very noticeable. What is actually happening again in terms of the international economy is a lot of countries are finding it for a variety of reasons difficult to use dollar for their trade settlement. Some have issues like sanctions, etc. But a lot of countries actually have a physical, they just don't have the dollars. So we have started now moving towards using rupees the bilateral currency as a way of settling. My own sense is one of the changes, we speak about how there was a bipolar world, US and Soviet Union, then it became unipolar US. Now we say, okay, it's moving towards multipolar, there'll be 10, 12, 15 countries who will count. I think to some degree this kind of spread is also happening in the currency world, that there are going to be, some of it could come out of technology, solutions. I mean, our very definition of a currency is in some ways under challenge. But I can see that that kind of very high focus on dollar which used to be there before, maybe that would dilute. Now I wouldn't go to the other extreme. I mean, I hear people speak of things like de-dollarization, etc. I think that is very, very exaggerated. The dollar is still the dollar.
Sure. Mr. Roy?
My name is Rupen Roy. I am a past president of this chamber. Sir, my question is that one of our largest trading partners is China. And we have this 1962 experience. And therefore, how do we balance the two issues of Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai to Hindi Chini Bye Bye, B-U-Y, B-U-Y?
We had a 1962 experience. Useful to remind ourselves of it because some people are in denial. But it wasn't just 1962. After 62, 1988, Rajiv Gandhi went to China. In many ways, that was the key step towards normalizing our ties. And then there was a very clear understanding that we will discuss our boundary differences, but that we will maintain peace and tranquility on the border. And the rest of the relationship will carry on. From 1988, that has been the basis for the evolution of our ties. There have been issues, I mean, I'm not disputing that. What changed now is what happened in 2020. In 2020, the Chinese, in violation of multiple agreements, brought large number of forces to our border, and they did it at a time when we were under COVID lockdown in this country. Presumably, that may have had some bearing on somebody's calculation. Now, we responded by counter-deploying our forces, and then all of you are familiar with the story. We had the clash in Galwan, and for 4 years now, we are both deployed ahead of our normal base positions, normal patrolling zones out there. So it's a very abnormal deployment today along the line of actual control. Now, given this tension between the two countries, it's not a matter of we had a conflict 62 years ago. It is what is happening today on the border. As Indian citizens, none of us can or should disregard actually the security of our country, the state of our borders. So we cannot carry on with the rest of life saying, that's not our concern. That is our concern. It's our country. It's our line of actual control. So it is today a challenge. Now there is an economic challenge, and that economic challenge was exactly what I spoke about. Our neglect of manufacturing and infrastructure in previous years. That why is today Indian business buying so much from China? I mean, partly you can say, their manufacturing scale, their infrastructure efficiencies, there's the nature, the subsidies that they give, the nature of their economy, that gives them an advantage. But I urge you all to think about it. Is it really good for the future of the country? Is it good for your own business to be dependent on some other source, which could leverage it at some point of time for some non-business related reason? So there is today a big economic security debate underway in the world, not just in India. It's happening in Europe, it's happening in the United States. That countries feel today that many core businesses must stay within the country. That supply chain should be shorter. If you don't make everything, at least supply chain should be reliable. It should be, this concept of what is called friendshoring. At least it should be with some country which will not mix business and politics. Someone with whom you don't have a boundary dispute. So I think this is a dilemma, but the answer to this dilemma is not entirely in the hands of the government. A large part of it is decisions which business has to make. And what the government would do is, we will definitely in different sectors, because you can't do everything at one time. But certainly in sensitive sectors, we will be very, very careful, who does what and where do we source from and who is eligible for what. I think that is a national security obligation that we have, and this government is very, very clear and conscientious about its national security obligations.
Absolutely. Mr. Imasinka, just at the back.
Hi sir, my name is Devrat Himmatsinka. I'm a fund manager and wanted to ask you about, I'm involved with EduNet in a small way. Just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. When we read the ASER paper that came out, I was shocked.
What paper?
The ASER research paper, the ASER report, ASER. So, we ended up reading that even though a lot of kids had access to education in the country, it was a shocking number that about 75% of class 4 kids did not have access to math. And that's what kind of led me to get involved with EduNet. And wanted to ask your opinion on how we can change this, because if we have to move forward as a country, I think the first thing that we need to do is, improve the roots and improve the education systems in the country. And even today, if we see, India has renowned universities like the IITs and IIMs, but people still give more preference to the Ivy Leagues for some reason. So how do we get at par with that, sir?
Sure. It's interesting. First of all, I'm not an educationist, but I give you a common sense response. I heard you say, the first thing we need to do is this. Somebody could be standing and saying, the first thing I need to do is to get piped water in my house. First thing I need to do is to get an electricity connection in my house. First thing I need to do is to have a house. First thing I need to do is to have a road to my house. First thing I need to do is to get my rations without people pilfering it or siphoning it. There are many first things we need to do in this country, and definitely education is among them. So the challenge for us is, unless we move on multiple fronts, when we speak today about different government schemes, because the government leads the way. We are still at an income level where these things, the key responsibility is with the government. Starting from portion, nutrition, actually starting from prenatal care, all the way till pensions. So prenatal to pension, actually today the Modi government has some intervention at some point, and most of these interventions actually have become scaled up interventions. And the idea is really, because eventually it goes down to what are called sustainable development goals, which is a very holistic sense. There are 17 goals. How do you actually address each one of these, which we are trying to do through different campaigns and exercises. Now, where education is concerned, absolutely. We have both a quantitative issue and a qualitative issue. Now, a lot of it is happening. I saw a number which said that, I know anecdotally you spoke about IITs being a premier institute. Now, the fact is, after that initial set of IITs, for many, many years, the IITs didn't decrease. There were a few, and this is a state where the earliest IIT came here to this state. One of the earliest IIMs came to this state. And yet, what should have happened, which is, if something worked well, what would be the natural response? That institution which worked well, now you should have 10 of it. When you are 10, you should have 100 of it. But that scaling up never happened. because for various reasons people had no ambition. They didn't have an interest really in the progress of the country. So today, actually, how do we both scale up education, and by the way, not along with education, I take both skills education go as a combination. And how do we continuously improve the quality? Now, I was reading that there was actually a figure that in the last decade, in this country, 7,000 new colleges have opened up. Now, quantitatively, I think it's a very, very impressive figure. Now, I know in many cases, if one looks, number of IITs, number of IIMs, number of AIMS, number of triple ITs, all of these have grown. But when so many institutions come up, it also is a challenge that how do you ensure the quality, how do you ensure that you don't, that you continually keep that up. Now, my experience anecdotally has been, I've seen private institutions, for example, some of them hugely impressive. I've seen government institutions, new ones. When I look at it, I couldn't have imagined when I was studying that anything like this would ever exist in our country. So we are capable of a lot of it. But you need a government, you need a society which is continuously pressing the pedal and wanting, we need to be ambitious and hungry and wanting to continuously reform every aspect of our existence. So if the alternative is that, I'm happy where I am, don't touch me, I'm insecure with I don't like this program, I will not let you do that, then I think it's a different kind of future. I mean, that vision of future actually looks to me like the vision of the past.
Thank you.
Let me remind ladies in the room that it's no more a men's world. I think you should also be asking some questions. Mr. Saria has one, but after him, I think maybe we can take one question from some of the ladies. Yeah, one or two. Yeah, Smita Chatterjee is one, and yeah.
Honorable Minister, sir,
Preeti.
you have given foreign policy a new dimension, new element, and a new thinking. And it's not only in the country, but I believe all over the world, globally now, people are talking about India's foreign policy. I'm sure in a couple of years it will be called, it will be termed as a Shankara policy or something like that in the later parts of the world. Sir, I come from a small town, Dibrugarh in Assam, and I chair the Indian Chamber of Commerce for Northeast. Sir, even I try to be humble. ICC has made a lot of contributions because our focus has not been on subsidy, but on connectivity and on infrastructure since big day. And Bangladesh connection, I mean, after 1996, when Sheikh Hasina ji became Prime Minister, and later on in 2009, when she got re-elected, we were invited and we made a presentation to her. And what you mentioned recently, just a little while back, Chittagong, Mongla Port, riverways, and various other aspects were part of our presentation in 2009, which has been happening. But in last one decade, it has really taken a shape. Sir, you mentioned last couple of days, you have mentioned about Northeast and also about China. We are very much concerned about Northeast, and when we talk about Viksit Bharat, Northeast is an important part of Viksit Bharat. You mentioned about Myanmar, Thailand, Myanmar, India, this highway. We will be very happy to learn that we had organized in ICC, BIMSEC, this thing, where Bangladesh came forward and announced that they would be like to become a part of it, to make it, extend it right up to Bangladesh and then to Calcutta. So it serves one of the purpose which we are talking about. When we talk about Northeast development, sir, connectivity, Myanmar becomes a very important part. After Bangladesh, we worked on Myanmar and we were very successful. Myanmar becomes a very important part because of the connectivity, because of this thing. In particular, Manipur is also a part of, Myanmar becomes a part of solution to Manipur. not much has been done on Myanmar, where a lot of focus is required so that our northeast development takes place. Kaladhan project could not take up. So what would you think, sir? How do we proceed further so that the connectivity becomes much better? Thank you.
Well, let me just make two quick points here. One, I think the Modi government very much recognizes the strategic importance of the Northeast and also the obligation that we have as a country to the development of the Northeast. In fact, every minister of the Modi government has visited the Northeast at least once. In fact, most of us have done it multiple times. If you look at the number of times Prime Minister Modi has gone, probably he's done more Northeast visit than all his predecessors combined. So the kind of attention and support that the Northeast is getting today is really unprecedented. It's also been very much a focus of foreign policy. You know, one part of it is how Bangladesh, improvements in our ties with Bangladesh has helped the Northeast. The other part, Myanmar, I will come to. But it's one very interesting innovation there is it's one region for which we have a dedicated forum with Japan. There is something called Act East Forum with Japan set up in 2017 where we actually agree with the Japanese on yen-funded projects. And these projects today have contributed to road connectivity within the Northeast, between the Northeast and the bordering countries. They actually are funding today the sewage and water supply in Guwahati. They will be funding the cancer super specialty hospital which will be coming up in Mizoram. So it's actually a case where we have got foreign resources to actually focus on the development of a particular state. And I think when a state really cooperates with the center, there are a lot of benefits which can come to the state. I think there's a general lesson here for a lot of people. Now, regarding Kaladhan, look, the Sitwe port is ready. It's been ready for some time. Our problem with Kaladhan has been building the road. The road goes from Myanmar, from Mizoram down to Sitwe. And the reason for it is very simple, that there is a conflict going on in Myanmar. That until something, the conflict is resolved, unless there is peace. We've actually had work teams which have been kidnapped, who are working on that project. So the expectation is not that Kaladhan failed to take off. I mean, Kaladhan in many ways has become a victim of civil disturbance and conflict in Myanmar. And that's something which is really beyond our control.
Sure. Preeti? Yeah.
Good evening, sir. My name is Preeti and I'm one of the directors at EduNet Foundation. Sir, our foundation collects the laptops, used laptops, refurbishes them, re-engineers them and further distributes it to underprivileged children. Sir, I have seen you talk about digitization of India and various forums, and also in your book you have mentioned it on several occasions, like the book Why Bharat Matters. So I just want to understand how can we better align Viksit Bharat strategy of digital India with our cause?
You know, I can only share with you my own experience, brief experience in the political world. All of us as members of parliament, we have a fund with which we support developmental activities. I'm a member of parliament from Gujarat. And the particular district that I focus on is a aspirational district with a large tribal population. It's called Narmada district in Gujarat. That's where the Statue of Unity is. Now, when we speak about what can we do, and particularly when you brought up laptops and digital, today out there, from my funds, for example, I support what the concept of a smart Anganwadi. That you can actually have children who are able to start, whose educational entry is faster with a digital medium than it would be if they did it manually. They start life so early. And in fact, in that region, because there is a lot of development work which is going on, but we were very keen that the employment benefits of it go a lot of it to the locals. So how do you actually, digitally skill people who have done just a few years of schooling? And the fact is, once you start, it's a very interesting thing in the, if one looks at any digital device, people who may struggle with orthodox literacy actually have a facility to deal with it. So for us, because we have a leapfrogging challenge here, that how do we massively raise the skill of such a vast section of our population? I think we are a natural candidate for this very strong embrace of digital education. And the kind of effort that you're making, I think is very laudable. I can see, variants of it actually in different states and cities and, districts that I travel to. And I'm very confident that, and it's something each one of you would see in your own particular environment, that how quickly people actually have mastered any kind of digital communication. I mean, I cited UPI numbers as one example of it, that today a street vendor would use a UPI payment. And for someone coming, from Europe or US or even other parts of Asia, it's a source of wonder.
Smita, there is Smita Chatterjee. Can we get the mic there?
Jai Hind, sir. I am Smita Chatterjee, Group CEO of Centrex Technologies, and I work primarily in the area of women and child as regards the women of the country. Are we at an inflection point?
It's a kind of a yes and no, because if one looks really again at the last 10 years, I still remember August 2014 when Beti Padhao Beti Bachao started, when there was a public mention about the need for toilets, when things which we never spoke about in public discourse, something like sanitary pads, real requirements, but which for a variety of reasons people didn't talk about it. Now there's a long way to go, but there's also a substantial way we have come. I mean, again, 10 years in certain areas is a small period to judge very deep change, but if you look at gender ratio figures, you can see particularly in certain states which were of extreme concern, you can see improvements out there. There's been a very conscious effort at actually promoting, role models as a way actually of not only enthusing women, but actually making men understand, what the possibility and the potential of what women can do. So I do believe at the end of the day, we are fighting years, generations really of entrenched thinking, prejudice, call it what you are. But I do believe as part of the many changes, I was, to the gentleman ahead, I said there are many firsts that we need to do. You could have easily asked me, and in a way I think that's what you meant. First of all, we need to sort out this issue. And I would agree with you that I think this too is something which we need to look at. If you are to talk Viksit Bharat, there are probably 1 million areas we need to progress, and you need a government and a leader who has that ability to think through it all, who will have all those programs which will have their impact in different ways which will be self-supporting. Because, often the recipient or the observer, people see one program making one impact. When you actually have the privilege of discussing or formulating or participating in these changes, each dot is actually connected to many, many other dots, and there is a whole front out there which is actually moving forward. I was at some place where we were discussing the piped water, the Jal Jeevan Mission, the fact that people don't have to go and collect water. Now look at the correlation. There's a direct correlation between providing piped water to people's houses and improving girls' literacy in that village. Because when there is no water, it is typically the girl child who's sent out to go and collect the water. So, you can think of it as a water project. It's also an education impact. It's also a gender issue. So it's by the way very much a health issue. Because the moment you get piped water, immediately the quality of your health goes up. So every one of these, each one has multiple facets, they all reinforce each other. They need to kind of move forward as in a kind of interconnected way. And we need that, I would say almost like an obsession. This country needs to push that over 25 years if we are to get to Viksit Bharat. Thank you. Shri Narayan Jain ji, Shri Shishir Bajoria ji, Srimati Lekha Sharma ji, Shri Ashok Purohit ji. Friends, it's really for me a very great pleasure to be with all of you, and मुझे पता नहीं आप में से किसी ने कभी किताब लिखी है या नहीं, but the greatest satisfaction that you can get is actually from your own book. And to see your book actually reincarnated in another language is something which touches you very, very deeply. And for me today, to have this book in Bangla is really a great honor. I have no words to tell you how deeply I feel about it, and I would really thank my friend who has made this possible. Now, I will come at some stage to some of the questions that or issues, googlies, दूसरास, underhand bowling, जो भी इनका था शिशिर जी का. But before I do that, मैं आप लोगों को दो चीज़ कहना चाहता हूँ. Because in a way that is a context for the book also and also for my talk today. One, I really believe today that foreign policy is not something limited to Delhi and not something limited to the government. आप सबका हक भी बनता है, आप सबका हित भी है इसमें. And so one of the issues which I have addressed in my book, and I actually मेरा तरीका ये था, I started with my earlier book. I would write a chapter. Normally it was often like a speech. Then I would go to some audience, somebody like all of you. And then I would have a session. And then I would, in that session, note down points which आपका reaction, किसी का criticism, some angle I did not see, some idea that they gave me. And that would then go back into whatever I had presented. So in a way, I can say it is a conversation with the public, which has been actually the basis of the book. And this point which I make, that foreign policy for you, that all of us today, our lives, our existence sometimes is impacted by foreign policy. And the most most clear example of it actually was COVID. कि आप सोचिए 2019 दिसंबर 2020 जनवरी आप लोगों ने कोविड का नाम ही नहीं सुना था, मैंने भी नहीं सुना था. जब पहले खबर आई, यू वुड हैव सेड ओके समथिंग इज हैपनिंग इन सम सिटी ऑफ चाइना, तो मेरा क्या लेना देना इससे. I mean, we all had that feeling. Then people felt, okay, it is spreading, so let us find a way of stopping it. तो चलिए एयरपोर्ट में कुछ प्रतिबंध लगाइए, stop travel, ये करिए, वो करिए. But the reality was, it was not possible to stop it. It was not possible to contain it. And then we had to manage it. Actually, you saw foreign policy come into action that suddenly, because there was Modi ji created a small group of ministers and said, you people have to be meeting every day to handle it. So one part of it was, उस समय देश में मास्क नहीं थे. Entire country, I think there were 2 factories which made ventilators. वो भी they used to import some components of it. PPE production was virtually absent. I mean, even masks we were importing, rubber gloves we were importing. कहाँ से हमने शुरू किया? And then actually you realized actually how important relationships became in the world. The initial supplies that came, because it was like, to be frank, it was like a global black market at that time. That same PPE, the same ventilator, now people said, no, you have to give order, it's now 5 times the cost. When you confirmed order, they said, no, badal gaya, now it is 10 times the cost. So people held you to ransom. People created all sorts of issues. You needed the connections, the relationships, the influence to do this. Now, it happened in the case of vaccine also, that there are roughly about, for any vaccine, there are about 40, 50 different suppliers whose different supplies finally go into the making of that vaccine, spread in different countries. And many of them, particularly in US at that time, उनके यहाँ नियम था, कानून था, that you cannot supply to another country till your own requirements are fully met. So effectively we were looking at an export ban. Now we had to go and negotiate with the Americans saying, please make an exception for us. And I will tell you why, and that is also relevant. Which they did. Or later on, आप लोगों को याद होगा जब वो डेल्टा वेरिएंट आया, and the oxygen shortage that we had. Now, how many countries actually helped us? Some gave us oxygen production units. Many of them actually sent us medical oxygen. Now they came in many cases because our relationships with them were good. So now there are many other aspects. Vande Bharat में लोग बाहर थे, उनको हम कैसे लाए, जो लोग आ नहीं पाए, requests were made to countries saying, please keep them, please look after them, please don't dismiss employees. If I have students, please find them shelter or dormant. So COVID is just one experience. Now there are many other experiences I put out there, that जो लोग Ukraine में फंस गए थे. If people came out of Ukraine safe and sound, except one person unfortunately who passed away, they came out because ultimately foreign policy delivered. In the most critical moment of Ukraine, the last lot of evacuation, had Prime Minister Modi not spoken to President Putin and President Zelensky, we would not have been able to stop the fighting and create the pathway for people to come out. So, now anybody who today, हमें पता नहीं, next time we travel, any of us who travels, but as I said, COVID में people who never traveled, जो अपने घर में थे, I mean, they did not escape COVID. COVID came to their house. So I tell people, ये नहीं सोचिए कि foreign policy is foreign. ये globalized दुनिया है. It impacts everybody. It comes to the country. It can come to your home. And it will affect in different ways. अब बहुत लोगों के हाथ में फोन है. Think about something as simple as the phone. Today, if many of these phones are made in India, uska bhi karan hai, foreign policy karan hai. If you have today the certain technologies, जो आपका 5G है वगैरह, somewhere all, any technology, anything today in our life, तेल की, पेट्रोल की कीमत, I mean, everybody says, okay, great, you stood up to world pressure and bought oil from Russia. पर वो foreign policy है. आप पेट्रोल पंप गए ना, टैंक भरा ना, what would have happened if that foreign policy did not work? How much more money would you have paid to fill that tank? And what would have been the inflation in the economy? Other than your gadi, your sabji would have been costlier because it would have had an inflationary impact on the entire economy. So I am very happy today that we have, this interest today in foreign policy. And मैं आप लोगों के साथ ये definitely मैं अपना अनुभव share करना चाहूँगा that this time around I have traveled length and breadth of the country. I have been to many states. I have been to big cities, small cities, sometimes even small towns. I see today an interest in foreign policy, which I feel is very good for the country. Because that means our minds are getting globalized. हम लोग पहचानते हैं what are the opportunities, what are the challenges. We are connected to the world, and that is a very important part of preparing mentally for our movement towards Viksit Bharat. So that actually is the first point to make. The second point, और वो शिशिर जी ने मुझे थोड़ा सा छेड़ा इस पे, जो I have in each case used one epic. पहली किताब में महाभारत था, दूसरे में रामायण था. And even Ramayana actually was an interesting story. मेरी पहली किताब जो थी, and I still am waiting now that our friend has done the translation of the second book. I requested him saying, please help me with the first book also. I couldn't find somebody who would attend to it then. I was actually talking about my first book somewhere, and somebody stood up. Actually, it was an author. It was an author who has written both on Mahabharata and Ramayana for popular audience. And she asked me saying, you have referred to Mahabharata. अब जो लोग कूटनीति राजनीति करते हैं, Mahabharata is a more natural story. माने उसका युग भी अलग है, लोगों का व्यवहार भी कुछ और है. It is a very different era with very different standards and ethics. So she said, have you ever thought about Ramayana from your perspective as a foreign minister or as someone in diplomacy? I will not say मैंने सोचा नहीं था, but to be honest, मैंने उतना नहीं सोचा that I could actually relate it to a kind of a book. Once she put that idea in my mind, I started rereading, thinking, debating, and that is what I have done in this book. That I have taken I've taken different situations. What is the state of the world? And I in fact will give you some examples. I had kept it for the end of the talk, but I will bring it up front. Today we say हमें विश्व बंधु बनना चाहिए. Effectively, what does it mean? It means, have maximum friends. Most important, have a good reputation. अब जो युवा पीढ़ी के हैं, they will say आपकी branding अच्छी होनी चाहिए. Now, think about it. In our entire imagination, in our culture, what do we associate really with, goodness, with sort of, as I say, the highest kind of reputation? That is Prabhu Shri Ram. Now, we say, okay, diplomacy mein we should do globally good things. I was speaking about COVID. I said, लोगों ने हमें oxygen दी. America gave us the ingredients for the vaccine. Why? Because we also did something. We also gave hydroxychloroquine to the Americans when they wanted. We gave paracetamol to them when they wanted. To Gulf countries, lot of Gulf countries gave us big amounts of liquid medical oxygen. But we, through the lockdown, हमने उनका food supply कभी नहीं काटा. And at that time, आप पता नहीं कितने लोग गल्फ से परिचित हैं. They import their daily food, actually in many ways, food supplies literally goes in flights out of India. So, ये जो global good जो करना है, actually this is what Ram and Lakshman were doing. I mean, initially when Vishwamitra goes to their father, Dasharath, and says, please give me your son so that I can, these rishis in Sharabhanga of forest, unki jo tapasya jo hai, the Rakshasas are interrupting it. So in a way, Ram, Lakshman, what do? They are actually doing something for the world. Exactly today you can say that same sentiment. There are 20 ships of the Indian Navy which are in the Arabian Sea today, dealing with these drone attacks and missile attacks and keeping the global shipping going. Or the point I make that every Ram needs a Lakshman. Every Ram needs a Lakshman because koi to hona chahiye sathi, somebody who's with you at good times, bad times, grief, jo when you get angry, thanda karte hain, when you give up, aapko protsahit karte hain, who actually, if you look, it's very interesting. I mean, Lakshman generally is supposed to be more hot-tempered. But actually at key moments, he is actually the person who's counseling him. For example, when the ocean, when Varuna does not allow the bridge to be built, so Prabhu Shri Ram fires one arrow and then Lakshman tells him, okay, don't fire the second one, the consequences would be too serious. And the bridge is allowed to be built. So every Ram needs a Lakshman, every country. We may be a big country. We are a big country. But we also need friends and allies. We need people who will stand by us. One part of diplomacy is how do you have countries, through good and bad, who will actually honestly tell you that this is our view, this is what in my belief is in your interest. Or this example which Shishirji raised, that Hanumanji in a way as a super diplomat, because उनको जो काम जो दिया गया था, it was to go to Ravan's court and to on behalf of Prabhu Shri Ram to convey what he had to do. But देखिए उन्होंने किया क्या? He went there, but he went there in a certain way after making a psychological impact on them. He had sort of destroyed many things so that they understood that this is not a normal happening. Then out there, he is able to assess everything in the court. Eventually, when Vibhishan leaves Lanka and joins Prabhu Shri Ram, there's actually a suspicion. कि भाई उनका भाई है, should you really take him or not take him? And it is Hanumanji's instinct from that experience of going to Ravan's court in Lanka that actually Vibhishan is in heart and soul with us, that he is a good man. Or then the whole idea that Lanka ko jalana, actually getting the manner in which he gets access to Ma Sita, the way in which he keeps her morale up. So if you look at it, this in a diplomatic world is a person, mane kaam diya, you gave him 5 things to do, he actually comes back and does 10. And the perseverance and the commitment that he shows. For when we actually in diplomacy talk about who are model diplomats, because our education has been very shaped by the Western world. जो उदाहरण जो देते हैं लोग, they are mostly Western kind of models which we are given. It can be modern, तो कोई कहेगा Metternich, Machiavelli, or something more modern. Yeah, people will go back actually to something Greek, and from their epics they would use. But we actually have our own example. And in the case of Sri Krishna, actually he is also a great strategist in a way, that it is his strategizing how to set narrative, how does the moral, the ethics favor the Pandavas. So the idea that, from Ramayana, the diplomatic lessons which are there, or even today, I would say the idea of competition, that you have, today we all read that between US and China, there is a very intense competition. Okay, there is a sense that China, believes that in many ways its ambitions are conflicting or competing, depending on how you define it. If you look at the Ramayana and I would say the competitive sense between Vishwamitra and Vasishtha, it is very similar. And for Vishwamitra, until Vasishtha accepts that he is a Rajarishi, he will not be content. He wants certification from him. So there are, even the idea, if you look at it as a power, the rise of a power. Today people say India is rising. But rise doesn't happen by itself. You have चुनौतियां होती हैं, you are tested, you are pressurized, there are challenges. Now this actually is what happens to Sri Ram. That beginning with, I would say, like going to the forest, dealing with the Rakshas, bending Shiva's bow, dealing with Parshuram. So at different stages, different tests come. And that is how finally, in a way, he gets his full potential. Iski ek self-discovery hoti hai, saying that this is really what you are capable of. Or I would, one example, one comparison. Actually, I think if my memory serves me right, I once saw it in Amit Shahji's one of his speeches. This is to Jatayu. And the comparison I make in the book is actually to Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee. That someone who is wise, someone who's willing to give everything to warn a nation of what is to come. So why I give you these examples is, once you start looking at our own tradition, at our own literature, at our own beliefs, our own faith, there are things out there which actually help us, which guide us towards a better understanding of the world. I have nothing against the world. In fact, I have very many things for the world. My whole life has been built around dealing with the world. But I do believe that we should deal with the world through the strength of our own history and our culture and our traditions. There are, for us, progress, when we speak about, rise of India, Viksit Bharat, it cannot and it should not be an imitation of the West. There are things from the West which we can profit by, which we can gain, which sometimes we can absorb. But we have to find our own way. And one of the reasons why I moved from India way to why Bharat Matters, that in these 4 years, 5 years gap, thoda India way I had written it 1 year before. In these 5 years, I have actually seen in our own country, in the government, in our politics, but I would say as a national mood, that sense of Bharat, that belief in that, we are not, I would say, apologetic or defensive about our own past and our own traditions. So that's, as I say, if we are to go forward, we have to know where we came from, if we have to really know where we are going. And where we came from rests on acceptance and appreciation of our own past, of our own traditions, and of our own heritage. And that is why, from just a much more, I would say, detached analysis of the world, which was the first book. The first book was more, I would say, calculation and analysis. Second book was more belief and commitment. So that is why India Way became why Bharat Matters. Now, you can ask me, okay, so now come to the book, why does Bharat matter? And why Bharat matters, I'll just give a few propositions, and then, as I say, I frankly much more enjoy interacting with people, and I would like to do that. Look, the world is a tough place. It's always been so. It has become more so. You can see it today. There is a war going on in Ukraine. There's fighting going on in Gaza, Israel. There is this Iran-Israel problem, Red Sea, Arabian Sea, I was telling you about. South China Sea mein kuch aur problems hain. On our own border and a line of actual control with China, there is, today our troops are there deployed to counter pressure from China. There is the constant issue of terrorism. COVID ke baad, many economies are in very bad situation. There are big governance challenges in different parts of the world. So if you look at the totality of it, things are very tough. Now, how is it different? There was a time before when one country or two countries or one group of countries would say, don't worry, we are in charge of the world. We will deal with it. They may have dealt with it properly or badly, but they at least said we will try and deal with it. Today, that is also not that. That if you look, actually, in many ways, all these things are going on. अगर कोई locally solution ढूंढ लेता है तो ढूंढ लेता है, अगर नहीं ढूंढता तो things carry on. So there is a certain, I would say, almost acceptance or indifference to many of these things which are going on. And the fact that no country today is dominant enough or no bloc is dominant enough to impose its will has created a completely new reality. Now in this reality, why Bharat matters is because people know that this is actually a transition period. That the old order has run out of gas, petrol. New order has not come. This is when, there is movement from one to the other. So in this, the world is watching India. They are looking to see, okay, if something new is going to happen, who will be the newer players? Now, number of countries in the world are more or less fixed, roughly about 200. Within that, you can say G20 is a very good example. Okay, these are the 20 biggest by economy. Within the G20, there would be some. You will say, okay, these are bigger, more powerful, growing faster. They have something more technology. You can use different metrics. So if you take this kind of thinking today in the world, definitely today a lot of the attention is on us. So why is it on us? I just give you 4 or 5 examples. After COVID, most of the world today is actually struggling with economic growth. So you have slowed down pretty much across the world. And जब growth rate कहते हैं, really growth has really fallen. In fact, in many cases, in some countries, some regions, it has not even come back to the pre-COVID levels. Now, in this, The world sees today a country, a large economy, growing at 7%, maintaining its fiscal discipline, keeping inflation low, visibly improving its governance. So they look actually at what is happening within the country, within the totality, the growth, governance, the total package, which is actually our external image. To some extent, they are also influenced by the COVID period. Because COVID period was in a way like a stress test on the world. So everybody, पता नहीं medical checkup आप लोग कराते हैं या नहीं, we are all put on a treadmill and then they check how did you handle the treadmill. Now think of the COVID, entire world was put on a treadmill. Now who fared how well? Now the feeling is today, these Indians, we thought they were actually going to be the biggest problem. They actually handled their own situation, they even helped with other people. So the recovery after COVID, the handling of the COVID, I think that is a second factor. The third is actually the way in which we conducted the G20. That when we got the G20 presidency, to be very frank with you, many countries felt sorry for us. उनके मन में था पता नहीं ये लोग कहाँ फंस गए हैं, they are really going to have a problem. They did not expect that we will actually be able to, in this, there were countries who were literally not talking to each other. कि एक minister आता था, the other person would leave the room. I mean, you will be amazed, you will think these are high-end diplomats, minister level ke log, this is not what is maybe your imagination of how it, but this was the reality. Now, to get in this situation, these 20 countries to agree on crucial issues, that I think people felt okay. That means actually these Indians, and here a lot of it personally revolved around the Prime Minister, that he has this ability today to get countries to work around, to accept. I would say to some extent, the stand we took on the Russia oil issue also helped. At one level, people said, okay, this is a country, they're clear about their interest, they will take a stand for their interest. But I also had many other countries who told me very honestly, we also felt the same, but we were not in a position to say it. We were not in a position to take the stand. But actually our interest and our sentiment was very much the same as yours. Then I would say another factor which has made the world actually think about us a little bit differently is the manner in which we have responded to the challenge on the line of actual control with China. Because many other countries today in Asia are facing challenges of some kind on their border or in the seas. But the fact, when the Chinese came in large numbers, this happened in May of 2020. I don't know आप लोग अभी आप याद रखते हैं नहीं. Remember, it was lockdown period. Lockdown period में you could not have left your home to go to the end of the street. And in that lockdown, when everything was shut, even now people don't fully appreciate. Prime Minister Modi ordered tens of thousands of troops with weapons to go to that border, which we managed actually during that lockdown period. The kind of railway, air, road mobilization which took place. Someday somebody will write about it. But actually if you looked at the number of troops we sent there, actually we sent probably more troops there than we even sent during the border conflict. So people see today that this is, an India which is willing to stand up and defend its borders. They also see on an issue like terrorism. Because when terrorism happens, everybody says, yes, it's very bad, very bad. Then they say, but don't do anything. Don't do anything because they are not getting hurt, you are getting hurt. So when somebody else is getting hurt, you give very good advice. When you are hurt, it's different. Now, they see what is the change. That India, they may not entirely like it, but they respect it. That India, which did not do anything even after something as big as 26/11 happened in Mumbai. But that India responded with Uri, that India responded on Pulwama. That India today has sent a very clear signal to the neighbor, saying, look, don't think by doing something bad here and going back, that will protect you. Now, all said and done, the world respects strength. The world respects that ability to actually enforce what is a point of view in a way in which there is a cost to someone who's done something bad. So I give you all these, and again, one example, because in our country, I know a lot of people even today talk about it. In fact, when I travel, I've had this experience in one, really quite remote district of Orissa. One I had in Pune, I think, where people who come out of Ukraine actually come to thank you, or their families come to thank you. So hamare yahan that whole issue is still very much in the consciousness of the public. But what you have to understand is, actually the rest of the world was also watching us. I had foreign minister of one country who complained to me very, very bitter, saying it was so difficult, so I also said, yes, there were a lot of problems. Then he finally told me, my first flight was very difficult, second theek tha. So his total experience was 2 flights, we did 90. And the world sees that, because remember, at that time, even developed countries, Western countries, told many of their citizens stuck in Ukraine, ki bhai, there's nothing I can do. You now find your way out. I warned you saying, please come out, you didn't come out, now you're on your own. So when people see this kind of, we go into Sudan, we bring back our people, we go, Ukraine was one, before Nepal, Yemen, there are a number of these. So this idea that India protects its people, India is there for its people. Let me tell you, that also really gives a certain reputation for India today in the world. So when I say today that India, why Bharat matters? Bharat matters because in the perception of the world, something has changed. Today it is more confident, they make their own judgment, they are willing to back up their judgment with action, they look after their people, they will stand up to pressure, but yet they are friendly people, they are firm when firmness is required. But they work with other people, they do global good. We may send, for our students, we may send the Air Force, but for global good we have sent the Navy to the Arabian Sea. So as I told you, after all, Prabhu Shri Ram's message is that you have to not only do things for yourself, you have to do things really for the collective as well. And that kind of image today, if there is a single action today in many parts of the world which has really created a feeling for India, really genuine feeling on the street, I'm not talking diplomats or officials. Actually, it is our vaccine. There are countries in the world, many of them very small countries. Unka number kabhi nahi aata vaccine ke liye. And they were actually, many of them were having this situation. They had a neighbor who was big and rich, who had bought enough vaccines to vaccinate population 5 times, 6 times, 7 times the population. But they were not willing to give 100,000 doses to somebody small and somebody less developed who was nearby. And many of these countries today, I've had personally this experience that people stop you on the street I mean, those of you जो social media देखते हैं, आपका interest है. You know, I recommend to you there is a very nice like a speech by the foreign minister of Jamaica. It's a lady. And she actually says that, look, I mean, she gestures with her hand. She said, look, I now have India inside me. So, so when I say that, you know, being good, being smart, advancing our interests, they are all together. And these are today actually the lessons from our own history, from our own epics, that it doesn't, you know, you don't have to be even necessarily a deeply religious person to learn from this. That it is actually ethical. It is often also for someone like me, there is a strategy and a diplomacy and a learning which comes from it. Now, I gave you all these examples, but at the end of the day today, eventually any country is known by the progress that they make at home. I may or may not be good at diplomacy, but my diplomacy cannot succeed if things at home are not working well. Because finally, that is my strength. So what has happened in the last 10 years? If you actually see the progress in India, you see the infrastructure changes in India, you see the growth rate in India, you see, you know, the airports coming up, the roads getting better. You actually see this whole effort we have made today at dealing with poverty. You know, in the last 10 years, 250 million people, 25 crore log jo hain, they have come out of poverty. 250 million people. In our history, in 10 years, that is the biggest which has ever happened. And it is not a one-time issue. We have actually created a system today where, because a country cannot progress if the leading, the richer segment progresses and people get left behind. So how do you today carry the entirety of society, that no one is actually left behind? Because that is when people start respecting you. Because one of our problems was, there was this deep image. Oh, India is country of poor people. Agar such kahe, actually poverty was like a branding for us in the world. But today, that very challenge, people actually look at it and say, oh, this country today can actually give rations, free rations, regularly, continuously to 80 crore people. That they can actually give health access to 35, 40 crore people. That they can give homes to 20 crore people. So when they actually look at what has today changed, and these very basic, I would say, provisions that we have done, this has impressed people. But what has impressed the world more is the manner in which we have done it. You know, we always had this reputation, not always, be 20, 25 years, कि हम back office. We are back office of the world because हमारे यहाँ IT है. During COVID, people started saying, चलिए ये pharma of the world भी हैं, ये pharmacy हैं, दुनिया की दवाई बनाते. But today, actually, people look at what we are doing digitally. That all this, I tell you, ration देना, घर देना, पानी की connection देना, gas cylinder देना, passport देना. I mean, those of you who have passports, ever applied for a passport, याद करिए how it was 10-15 years ago. कितना time लगता था आपको? हाँ? अरे वो मैं कह नहीं सकता ना. So, नहीं, अब है. Now, see, this, when I say that it is scaled up, actually, ये digital जो है, इसमें एक ईमानदारी का भी लाभ है. That when, अगर आज today आप लोग passport के लिए किसी का application होगा ना, you can actually see not only passport, other things also. You will get a tracker कि आपका इस दिन हुआ था, यहाँ से फाइल वहाँ गया, वहाँ से ये गया, पुलिस वेरिफिकेशन के लिए है. तो लोग जो हैं, people used to wait months, sometimes years, and nahi mila to they would just accept, nahi mila to nahi mila. You know, today 15 din nahi milte to I start getting, tweets and emails and so on, which is good. I like it. And this is happening. I mean, in a way, I can say it is not only, people look at it sometimes as benefits. ये लोगों का हक है, अधिकार है. And once they start getting it, the impact of it on the total collective, this people see today. They are seeing today changes in this country in education, in skill, in infrastructure, in mindset. And they are asking themselves that if today the world is moving in this more technology-centric area, what is the relevance of India here? So Bharat for them matters because this 7% growing Bharat with all these changes, with 250 million people coming out of poverty, Bharat is a bigger market, Bharat is a bigger production center, Bharat is a bigger talent pool, Bharat is a place today for design, for innovation. You can see today if more FDI investment is coming in, kuch to karan hai. It shows their assessment. More countries today want to do free trade agreements with us. Why is it? Because they feel today that these are things that they really need to do with us. In fact, if you look company ke level mein, there is this. You look at the number of joint ventures. The fact how many more in today Indian companies are getting involved in global supply chains. So we have changed. This 10 years has actually created a different impression. But as I said, the world has also changed. The world today has other problems. One problem is that उनको लगा पिछले 20 साल 25 साल में there is a kind of over concentration कि उनकी निर्भरता जो है चाइना पे ज़्यादा हो गई है. और ये कोविड के समय में सबको लगा कि कहीं ना कहीं चाइना में कुछ प्रॉब्लम हो जाए तो पूरे दुनिया को इसका प्रभाव दिखाई देता है. तो आज जो है दुनिया में एक बहुत बड़ी चर्चा हो रही है, हाउ टू डी रिस्क द इंटरनेशनल इकोनॉमी, हाउ डू यू हैव many सेंटर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन, हाउ डू यू हैव मोर सप्लाई चेन्स. अगर डेटा का विषय है तो लोगों को लगता है कि डेटा जो है ऐसी जगह होनी चाहिए विच इज सिक्योर, जहां जो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट है, रूल ऑफ लॉ है, वो सो इसमें पीपल इमीडिएटली स्टार्ट थिंकिंग ऑफ इंडिया. So it can be for economic reasons. It can be because, as I said, our economic growth has interested the world. It can even be for connectivity. That today, अगर logistics बनाना है तो लोग चाहते हैं कि भारत इसमें शामिल हो, तो मिडिल ईस्ट के साथ एक connectivity corridor है, एक पूर्व की तरफ, वियतनाम की तरफ एक ट्राइलैटरल हाईवे है. And then, as I finally said, ये अब दुनिया में एक हमारे बारे में इम्प्रेशन बन गया है that India, भारत has this ability कि हम रूस के साथ भी काम कर सकते हैं, ईरान के साथ भी काम कर सकते हैं, अमेरिका के साथ भी चल सकते हैं, इजराइल को भी साथ रख सकते हैं. दिस एबिलिटी जो हमें G20 में दिखाई दिया, दिस हैज ऑल्सो टुडे दिस एक्सेप्टेबिलिटी दैट हम अलग अलग, I mean, I tell people this सबका साथ सबका विकास ये डिप्लोमेसी में भी चलता है. That how do you actually carry everybody with you? So these were some of the thoughts. Today definitely I would say कि from a global perspective there is much more interest today in India. There is much more respect for India. More countries want to work. ये नहीं है कि हमारी चुनौतियां नहीं हैं, कुछ उत्तर में है, कुछ पश्चिम में है, सबको पता है. कुछ ऐसी चुनौतियां हैं जो विच आर नॉट कंट्री स्पेसिफिक, अब क्लाइमेट चेंज जैसा है या कुछ टेक्नोलॉजी की होगी. बट ओवरऑल टुडे वी आर, जब हम लोग विकसित भारत की बात करते हैं, आज जो है द 10 years जो पिछले 10 साल का रिकॉर्ड जो है वो एक फाउंडेशन है, एक बुनियाद है, आधार है जिस पे हम आगे 25 साल जो विकसित भारत की यात्रा जो है, वी कैन एम्बार्क ऑन दैट विद अ ग्रेट डील ऑफ कॉन्फिडेंस. एंड मैं बिल्कुल मैं अपने अनुभव से कह सकता हूं that today really Bharat matters more and more, and as we proceed down this path, I think it will continue. Thank you very much.
Cover more and more. One request to everyone. Question would be really appreciated rather than a speech. So let's start.
Yeah, I'm a surgeon. I wanted to ask Dr. Purnendu Roy. I studied in Jipma in southern India. What I'm wanting to know that we understand that education is the most important thing along with the growth of any country if it is not matched. And there was a time when we heard that the Ivy League universities like Harvard and others were planning to come tie up in Gujarat. When we see today, top 100 universities in the world, we still don't have a single Indian institute in the top 100 in the world. Is there any plan that since we have, so we have millions of people are abroad. Now, so we have the brain and they want to go to the Ivy League. Are we likely to get this into foreign policy that Stanford, Harvard, Yale, they are all or will be coming? Thank you.
The next question.
Sir, I think this was an enriching and informative session to all of us. Now, why Bharat Matters? I think, although I'm not into means everything, but I know few of the reasons like abrogation of Article 370, that was one of the reasons. And moreover, you know, how India answered Trudeau, the Canadian relationship with India, that I do not know whether you covered or, but these two are important. But at the same time, what I find is lot of migration is taking place, especially the young generation. Now, I do not know, and I know this very well because sometimes I was also looking into this. So how to address this? How can you convince the young generation to be in India?
Madam, your introduction.
I'm Dr. Pratusha Das. I'm the Dean of St. Xavier's University.
Okay. At the back.
Recently, we have seen that US and Canada have both accused us of murders in their countries and accused us of supposed murders. Also, we have seen questions like religious freedom being raised. Now, are these purely concerns regarding their vote bank? Are they addressing their vote bank? Or is there an attempt to influence Indian voting, to influence India? Would they want a more pliant Indian government?
Okay, we will have a Mantriji answer, but before that, sir, you on the front row, thanks. I'm sorry, but I didn't announce this earlier. You just have to contribute 2,000 rupees for the phone ringing. And anybody else?
Let me पहले मुझे इनका उत्तर देने दीजिए, then I'll come turn by turn. So the first question, the point you made about education. Yes, definitely today I think there is a lot of focus on education, and education reform, education expansion, education deepening is a very big priority. Many reasons for it. It's not a question of Ivy Leagues coming here, because at the end of the day, you know, a country like us, we should not be pegging our aspirations and standards on any league of any other country. We have to develop our own mere quality, you can say, or motivating institutions. What has happened in this country is, if you look at the growth of population, if you look at the growth of the economy, in many areas, the capacities did not keep up with it. You are a doctor. Please look at your own field. No, I'm not blaming you, I'm just making a remark. Look, did our hospitals keep up with that demand? No. Did our infrastructure keep up with the demand? No. So we today actually have a big task in front of us in different domains. So if we are today rapidly building our roads, rapidly building our railways, airports, whatever, why are we doing it? Because somewhere we didn't move fast enough for whatever reason, government of the day, constraint of the day, resources nahi the, policy kharab tha. So definitely education today is ripe for that kind of big push. That one is a huge catch-up, that's one. The second is actually change the very nature of education, which is we have people who come out of educational institutions who are actually not employable. I've experienced it myself. It won't be in the medical field, but it would be in many other areas. I spent in my transition from civil servant to politics, I also had a year with business. And I saw at that time the kind of challenges today that business faces in actually getting ready to employ potential from the market. It's a huge problem, which means actually we have to focus much more on skills and employability rather than degree kind of education, which is very hard because, our culture, see, we are all brought up to believe, all of us, myself included, saying, our parents would have told us, no, go get a degree first, how can you compromise on that? So we have to challenge some things we have been with. There have to be those changes. What we have done is we have started this process of getting foreign universities to open collaborative campuses or, double degree type collaborations. It will be, we'll have to create a model which is sui generis, which is which will be specific to India. There is no, we will not grow by opening our doors to foreign universities en masse because they will educate a very narrow section at very high fees and will make us into a revenue generating operation. We don't want that, The idea is not to regulate necessarily the cost of education. There somewhere, there will be a range, a differentiated range out there. So this is the new education policy. Actually provides for many of these. I think it kind of has come as we were moving for election, so a lot of the consequences of it on the ground have not happened. But your basic point that we need to reform education, because look, I give you, there's the economics of it. Today, roughly about more than 1 million Indian students go out. That's a challenge, It's a challenge not just financially. Many of them go to places, I can tell you, where the quality of education is not good. And including in the medical field. I sometimes get concerned about actually what kind of education people are getting. So these are real challenges. We have to face up to them. We have to expand our capacities, and definitely in education, I think that is the backbone of the change that we are looking at. The second issue, which is related to that, the migration issue. Look, why do people migrate? At the end of the day, people migrate because of a job opportunity. That is because if people get the same opportunity, it's human nature. Nobody wants to leave home. You leave because you expect something better and different and additional far away. This can happen for the whole country abroad. It can also happen within the country, that within some states, we see people actually going to other parts of the country in search of jobs. There's a lot of internal migration as well. That's also. So what does one do for it? The answer is really to create the incentives. People are not going to not go abroad because you tell them, no, it's very unpatriotic, please don't go abroad. They will not go abroad if they feel that the opportunities are just as good, or there is something here which will match that. So we collectively have to actually create those opportunities. So when we say Viksit Bharat, when we say growth rate badna chahiye, we need to progress. That's another 2,000 for you. These are really some of the steps that we need to do, and we cannot really create employment in this country if we do not increase manufacturing. We have neglected manufacturing. Services will not give us those numbers out there. There are too many people whose livelihood is focused on the agricultural sector or the informal sector. So this will only happen if manufacturing in this country is very significantly increased, and we support self-employment. Because self-employment can also be a very big employer, which means we must have the financial policies. There is a reason today. Why do we give this Mudra loans and Swanidhi loans? Because they actually support a very, very big segment. If you look at the number of people who have taken Mudra loans, I think there will be almost 500 million users of Mudra applications in the last decade. And that is actually a very, very big push for the economy. There's a big debate today even about employment. That debate doesn't factor in actually the large number of people who today find self-employment a better option than to settle for something which they really don't want to do. On the question of US, Canada, religious freedom, etc. Do they want to influence us? Answer is yes. They do want to influence us, because many of these countries feel that they have influenced the world for the last 70, 80 years in the world order, and Western countries actually feel they influenced the world for the last 200, 300 years. So are they willing to, how do you expect someone who's been in that position to give up those old habits so easily? So there's a natural desire, because that also answers the gentleman at the back. Why are these papers, which you mentioned, why are they negative in India? Because at the end of the day, they are seeing an India which is not, in a sense, compliant or with their image of how India should be. That they want, they want people, or they want ideology, or they want a way of life, or a social, as they say, people like us. They are looking for that class of people really to rule this country. And I think they're disturbed when the Indian population feels otherwise. And that has been today actually a big part of the debate between us and the world. You can say world really means your Western countries and the Western media. I mean, to be very honest with you, actually, please, in many cases, because I follow this for a living, Western media actually in some cases openly endorse candidates and endorse political parties in this country. I mean, they don't hide their preference. So the answer is, and they're very smart, because look, somebody's been doing this world domination game for 300 years, you learn a lot. Anubhavi log hai, chatur log hai. So, they will do after all, what does a newspaper do? Oh, they will reputationally damage you. Oh, koi index nikalenge. They will put you down in that index. They will, countries who have to go to court to decide the result of their election are giving you today gyan about how to conduct your election. This is the mind games today which are actually taking place in the world. And I've been following even this election, the kind of commentary. I mean, in this country, in the hottest summer, still, look at the percentage of people who come to vote. Look, we all have our arguments. We all have our arguments till the day the votes are counted. After that, I mean, let us look at our own record. We all accept what this is, we all have faith in the system. Whatever questions we raise because politics, when people raise those things, you have to, but at the end of it all, in our heart of hearts, we all actually, the greatest strength of our system, proof the system works, is actually if you see the multiple elections, the fact that governments change in this country, that one party hands over to another party, different parties, they may have their debates, finally they all, find a way of working together.
Yes, madam.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for your speech. I have a two-part question. You spoke about a blind imitation of the West. Firstly, what do you define as the West? Which countries do you put in that bracket? And secondly, where do you draw the line between imitation and appreciations, since you spoke about appreciation of all cultures?
Your name, please?
Omika. Omika.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Anjula, a gynecologist. Recently, last week, I heard your speech. You were talking about POK. And in many election rallies, it's been echoed, POK ko lenge. Is it a strategy for this year, the government?
Radhya, I'm in the field of environment. I was just thinking whether I can have a little privilege to asking that what is your thoughts on how to fight the enemies within, especially when we are having a problem of tremendous demographic change in India.
At the end,
Kaushik Das, a New Delhi-based journalist with a special interest in global geopolitics. I have two specific questions. Recently, the Indian media reported that Pakistan occupied Kashmir wanted to merge with India. What is your take about it? And we have two friends, Russia and US. Now, Russia has accused the US of influencing the Indian election. What is your view? Thank you.
Dr. Jaishankar, it was actually the acknowledgement of the world when we had this, the strength of this country was acknowledged when the G20 presidency brought us huge world's trust, global trust. And on the backdrop of that, one thing which is eluding us for a long time, that is a chair in Security Council. What do you think are the possibilities in your future? That's my question.
So I'll do one round. Let me start with the young lady there. You asked me who do I mean by the West. See, we use the West as a broad group, basically like North America and Europe. Even I accept within the West, not all countries or all governments or all views are the same. But I would still say that there is nevertheless a certain cultural, ideological, historical kind of thinking there, which comes from that period of colonial domination, then the post-Second World War, the Western Bloc's position. And if you actually look at you can say the rules of the world, how the world works, lot of the institutions, lot of the practices, who's right, who's wrong, these kinds of things, they tend to dominate the debate. So often what they do is they will be very selective, they will suddenly, come to us and say, you are India, you are a democracy, how can you support another country which is not democratic, taking action against a democracy? Now, I am India, I had a non-democracy to my left and one to my right and one to my north, and I found the West was busy when it suited them. So what happens when you control the narrative? You actually are able to create a certain impression in the minds of other people. The reality may be otherwise. I'll give you a very good example from Ramayana. You know, Ravan had created this impression that he was undefeatable. In fact, people said that, you know, his only one weakness was when he had to take the bone, he named all the categories. He didn't name men, humans, and that was why, you know, Lord Rama was born as in a human form. But the fact was actually, if you look, Ravan was defeated. Vali defeated Ravan. I mean, when Angad went to meet Ravan, and Ravan was not nice to him, Angad actually reminded him saying, look, my father actually tied you up. So, or there was another king called Kartavirya Arjun of Mahishmati who defeated Ravan. But in narrative, inconvenient facts, no, you kind of know how to get rid of it. You clean it up. And then you create this very useful, neat, simple, deployable viewpoint. And how you condition and influence other people. I got two POK questions, so I'll put them together. Look, today, yes, things are, there is a certain ferment happening in POK. I think you can see it in social media, you can see it on television. The analysis of it is very complex, but definitely I have no doubt in my own mind that someone living in POK is comparing their situation with someone actually living in Jammu and Kashmir and saying that, you know, how is it that people today are actually progressing there. And they know that sense of being under occupation, of being discriminated, of being treated badly. I think clearly that any such comparison would be preying on their minds. And, you know, the gentleman there actually asked me, POK, when would it merge? I don't know what you mean by merge, because it has been India, it is always India. So, yes. So, if you ask me when will the occupation end, I think that's what you meant. So I actually find it very interesting. You know, till 370, when 370 was continuing, in our own country, actually there was not much discussion about POK. There was at one point in the 1990s, in fact, where some pressure was put on us by Western countries at that time. And then at that time, this was during Narasimha Raoji's government, Parliament actually unanimously passed a resolution on POK. But after that, actually the debate in this country, and I would say in many ways the public interest in this country receded. But when we actually moved on 370 and finally put an end to what was a temporary provision of the Constitution, which should never have continued for that long, and which was actually in a way fueling the separatism and violence and terrorism. I think people across the country today actually have become aware of the, of our history, of the mistakes that were made in the past. In fact, often I go a lot to universities. You know, people are very interested. They ask me, why did we go to UN on Kashmir? When I tell them, read the history, that, Sardar Patel had very deep reservations, but it was something that Nehru personally pushed at that time. And in fact, one of Sardar Patel's warnings on this was, because again, I come to the West in a way, he said, don't subject your interest to the judgment of other people who may have their own interest in this matter. And the West had an interest. We were going to them like a judge. The judge was party to the whole dispute. So this today, I think, is to me, a very interesting awareness in this country, an interest in this country. And usually, you know, when once a country becomes aware and interest, then things happen. So we have to wait and watch. Now, the whole issue of, I think, demographic change issue. Look, you know, we are a country, we need today, if we are talking of good governance, if we are talking of being a modern state, the basic obligation of the state is to protect its borders. You know, leaving your borders unguarded, open for people to come, this is not democracy and freedom. It is, at the very least, incompetence, probably vote bank. That, you know, we are today, you know, we've allowed things to happen in this country whose consequences are really serious. And it is, and when we actually today try to rectify it through good governance, I mean, to me, you know, as a country, I am entitled to fence my border. It is my right to decide who will come into my country and not who you know, my people from my neighbors, they cannot choose, and it's not, certainly not their right to decide to come into my country. And we actually mix it up with as though we are putting some unreasonable restriction. And, you know, stopping a foreigner coming into the country is not discrimination. It is actually a basic obligation to your own people. You know, each one of you will do it for your own house. I mean, would you allow your house to be entered by a stranger and give a few rooms of your house to someone you don't know? You will never do that. And yet you expect, I mean, you don't expect, but some people expect the country to do that. So I think today we need, you know, 370 is one example today, protecting our borders is one. You know, there are a whole lot of issues where we need to correct the mistakes of the past, and one of the ways of progressing is to be honest about it, to debate it, to look at what, because every country will make mistakes. I mean, nobody is perfect. But a smart country will correct those mistakes. And in different ways, that is what we are trying to do. On this Russia, US, see, look, they have their arguments and their but I am very confident of one thing in this country. I think people of this country are confident, they are assured, they are sensible. Our electoral system is very robust. Our electoral commission today is very strong. I don't really accept that others will be able to influence the outcome of this. I think people will try. They will try. But I'm very confident that they will not succeed. And the last question on the UN Security Council. Again, you know, that also there is a history. I mean, I don't want to go into it, then it sounds like I'm complaining too much. But I do want to say this, that for many years, what is a general feeling in the world is being blocked by a few countries. And what they're doing is, they're not allowing it to actually come up. You know, sometimes case ko up, you don't allow it to come to court. So that is one way of dealing with a problem. So they're not allowing this issue actually to be debated with a record, with, you know, see what happens normally if something important is being debated, there's normally a draft, people make amendments, then there's a discussion, there's a vote. All that has been delayed or blocked for many, many years. But I do sense today that there is a change in the world, that there is a very powerful sentiment for change. I think when people today look, you know, they look at what is happening in West Asia, Middle East, what is happening in Ukraine, they see that big, you know, we speak about a global organization. The most populous country is not there. There's no African country. There's no Latin American country. The UN was invented when there were roughly 50 independent countries. original membership of UN was about 50. Today it is almost 200. So imagine, I mean, any organization or enterprise or a company, I mean, if the shareholders had gone up by 4 times, 3 times, I mean, would the organization not change? And yet, that is this. So I feel the pressure will mount. I'm very confident. I can see some signs of it already. So I think it's something I'm very hopeful.
One last...
so much. Dr. Jaishankar sir, I would like to approach, the question that pertains to the elephant in the room. We are sitting here in Kolkata, and there have been a number of discourses about the situation across the border on the western side. Whereas we are here on the eastern border, and we are ongoingly facing a marked demographic change, which I think Dr. Dipankar was also, pointing to. It has come to us through, various propaganda that maybe the center is scared of approaching the condition that lies on in this eastern state, for the simple reason that the situation here might be even more complicated than the one in Jammu and Kashmir. Any comments on that?
Okay, one last.
It was wonderful listening to you, Dr. Jaishankar. I'm a proponent of corporate governance and good governance. And in this context, the 2013 Companies Act put as a duty of a director that they must work in the interest of the company. Now, when people get to the helm of affairs of the country, whichever side of the table they are sitting on, isn't it a duty to uphold the interest of the country and not denigrate the country? Can we do something about it?
A very quick one, sir.
Duty of the country and not, what is it? Not
denigrate the country.
India entered into a deal with Iran to develop a port there, and following that, they've almost threatened that India should be ready to face consequences. Your comment on that? Thank you.
So let me respond to the first question. I don't think it's the elephant in the room. Look, the situations are very dissimilar. I would not compare what had happened for many, many decades in Jammu and Kashmir with the challenges which this part of India and the challenges which we face on the eastern border. But I would say this: if you look at the record of the Modi government, you can say many things about it, but you cannot accuse it of being scared. I think we do say one thing, even in a manifesto, this time in the manifesto we have said some things. We really mean what we say. We give a lot of thought to what we put, what we promise. It is not something that is casually done. And I would, in a way, answer your question by saying that when it comes to the security of the country, when it comes, as I said, it is not just my personal belief. I mean, all of us in the government believe today that protecting our external boundaries is a basic duty of that country. And today, good governance has many implications. I mean, and good governance also includes knowing who your citizens are. So I think these are responsibilities of a country, and I think I'm very confident that Modi Sarkar will do its duty in regard to all of this. Yes, I'm not entirely sure I follow your point, but I totally agree with you. I mean, to me, anybody who's in government should not denigrate the country, should not denigrate the government. It is in a way, a responsibility, or I would even say a privilege, that the person who's in that position has been given. So I really see, I cannot be of a different opinion than to say that nobody should really badmouth the country at home or abroad. And one of the things which trouble me sometimes is, we have our politics and differences and, discussions inside the country. But when I do occasionally see people go out and say in this country things are breaking down, democracy is in danger, institutions are falling apart, and actually almost say, why don't you come and, help us fix it. These things trouble me because I do, there are some things which, like you would do in a family, some things stay at home and some things maybe are more legitimately discussed outside. I think it's important to be respectful of that. And the last question, the Iran issue, we've had a long association with the Chabahar port, but this was, we could never sign a long-term agreement. And the reason was there were various problems in the Iranian end, who was our partner, JV, it's a JV. So, joint venture, the partner changed, conditions changed. So, finally, we were able to sort this out and we were able to actually get the long-term agreement done. And the long-term agreement is necessary because without it, you cannot really improve the port operations. And the port operations, we believe, will benefit the entire region. So, I did see some remarks which were made, but I think it's a question of, communicating and convincing and, getting people to understand that this is actually for everybody's benefit. I don't think people should take a narrow view of it, and they have not done so in the past. So if you look at even US's own attitude to Chabahar in the past, the US has been appreciative of the fact that Chabahar has a larger relevance. So, we will work at it.